Welcome back to the Distressed Princess. I'm so excited to have you here today because I'm counting down my top 10 very favorite fall DIYs. Let's kick it off with DIY number 10. In this DIY, we'll be using these cookie tins that I found at Goodwill. We'll just be using the lids. You can save the bottoms for another project. We'll be painting them with white Kills chalk paint. You'll need some Mod Podge or decoupage. I used a black Sharpie paint pen. These wooden beads that you can get at Michael's, very inexpensive. And free printables from Pinterest, jute twine, hot glue gun, and scissors. So you'll begin by painting your lids. I didn't do the insides, just the outsides, with a couple of coats of paint just to make sure that the original design doesn't show through. And then, this is self-explanatory, I'm just cutting a circle so that if you can imagine how you want your design to look on the front of the tin. Lay it out for looks, and then I decided to cut it down just a little bit more because I wanted there to look like some chippy edges that I wanted to use my black paint pen with. So I just Mod Podged that down. This is the part of the project that I like the most, making those little chippy edges with a black Sharpie paint pen. A regular Sharpie would do too, but I prefer the paint because it looks a little more realistic. Look how easy that is. Just draw little lines and little jaggedy places where the enamel, this is supposed to look like enamel, the enamel has worn off and gotten chipped through the years. Now we're going to make a cute wooden bead handle for our cookie tin decorations. And so I used one packet or one thing of these beads for each of the lids. And here's a tip. I've seen other people do this on YouTube, is how I got it. Wrap a piece of tape around the end of your jute string and it won't fray while you're putting your beads on. I love that. That is a lifesaver. And this is how they turned out. I think they're so stinking cute. And for practically nothing. I'm sure that I didn't pay more than $1 for both of those cookie tins. We're off to a good start. Here's Fall DIY number 9. If you are an admirer of these amber colored jars and glasses, here is a DIY on how to do them yourself at home. And I'm using this little jar that came from the Dollar Tree, and it had some little seashells in it. To color the glass, you'll need some school glue. Now I'm using white school glue, but you could definitely use clear too, or Mod Podge works as well. Now you want to pour just enough glue that you think you would need to cover the piece of glass that you're wanting to dye. Then you're going to color the glue with food coloring. Now this is kind of a trial and error. I started out with just a drop or two of each color because I'm trying to get a brown. But the secret is you want it to have a reddish yellow undertone. So when this glue dries clear on your glass, the reddish yellow undertone of amber glass will shine through. So to achieve this effect, I added quite a bit more of the yellow food coloring and a little bit more of the red. Then you want to put your glue inside of your jar. And use a paintbrush if necessary to try to get that glue to cover all the little nooks and crannies. Then turn your jar upside down on a paper plate so all the excess glue will run out. And ever so often I would lift my jar and move it to a new location on the plate so that it didn't get all piled up and gummed up with that glue sitting in one spot. The longer you leave your jar upside down on the paper plate, the more glue will run out and the fainter color you will have. So if you want a darker amber color, then you don't want to let all that glue run out. And if you want to speed up the process, you can use a hair dryer. And then I used a damp rag to wipe away any of the leftover glue that was around the rim of the jar. And this is what it looked like after a full 24 hours of drying. Here's Fall DIY number 8. And in this DIY, I'm using another one of those white fluffy pillows from the Dollar Tree. And I forgot to mention or show it in the last DIY, but these pillows have some really long tags attached to them, so you'll need to cut those off for both projects. You will also need some white material, and I'm using flour sack towels that I got at a Rural King, which is a store that we have where I live. I know that the Dollar Tree sells flour sack towels, and the Dollar General does too. And you will need this printout, which I will link in the description box. You'll need to print it out on sublimation paper, and you will need some heat-resistant tape. If you're new to sublimation, I will leave a card above that links to my tutorial on how to set up a sublimation printer. And this is the paper that I'm using. I will link in my description box if it is in stock on Amazon. If it's not, I will find another brand to link in my description box. The first thing I did was measure my pillow to see how big an image I wanted to put on it. So what we're trying to accomplish here is we're going to put an image on the white material, and then the white material is going to go on the pillow. So I thought about 6 inches each way would be a good size image. So that's what size I made my image when I printed it. And it's also very important that you mirror your image when you're printing. Then I measured out the 6 inches on the white material, and I did not include the hem for this because I want my edges to be frayed. So actually, instead of 6 inches, I'm actually going to mark off 7 inches. I allowed an extra inch to fray around my edges. And then I cut off the hemmed edges. Then cut out your image and leave some room around the edges so that you can use some heat-resistant tape. Here I'm just checking to make sure that my sizing is all correct. You'll need to check the instructions on your sublimation paper to make sure that you get the correct temperature and timing for your heat press. I'm using my Cricut Easy Press, and I set the temperature for 385 and the time to be 25 seconds. While the Easy Press is heating up, get everything ready to do the sublimation. You'll need something like an old towel to lay on the bottom side of your project. Then you'll need to put your material on top, and we're going to use that Easy Press to iron out those wrinkles before we start anything. It's also a good idea to lint roll your material that you're sublimating on to remove any lint or loose particles. When the Easy Press came to temperature, I held it down on the material for about 10 seconds and moved it around a little bit to iron out those wrinkles. Then the image goes ink side down onto the material, and you'll need a couple pieces of heat-resistant tape, which I use the Cricut brand, to hold it in place. You need something to act as a barrier between your project and your heat press, and I like to use the Dollar Tree parchment paper, but you could also use craft paper or butcher paper. And then put the heat press straight down on top, don't move it around, and hold it with medium pressure for the 25 seconds. Then lift the heat press straight back up and take a peek at what you have. I always try just to look at a little corner first, and if it looks good, then I take the whole thing off. If it doesn't look good, I put that little corner back down and do another few seconds. I'm always impressed with how these images turn out with the sublimation. This is a highly recommend thing to try if you can. The next step is to fray the edges. This is of course optional. You could hem your edges, but I like the rustic look of frayed edges. And the last step is to attach your material to your pillow. And I would recommend using fabric glue. I don't have any fabric glue, so I'm just using regular hot glue, but fabric glue would be probably the better way to go. And there you go, quick and easy fall pillow. Here's DIY number 7. This is actually a review that I did for the Vivo Home Heat Press, but it turned out to be one of the cutest fall decorations. And all it is a Dollar Tree pot holder, and I used an SVG cut file from Cricut Design Space. You can pick out any design that you like. I just cut that out of heat transfer vinyl, pressed it onto the pot holder, and I loved it. Here's my favorite fall DIY number 6. This is the easiest DIY of the bunch today, and it's using this maple leaf slatted wood decoration that you get at the Dollar Tree. First, I stained it with the Waverly Antique Wax with a baby wipe. The baby wipe works to dilute the wax some so that it works like a stain instead of just a color. After the stain was dry, then I wanted to do something really fun, and I decided that I would put some big white polka dots on this maple leaf, and it was so easy, just using the white acrylic craft paint and a round stencil dauber that you can get at the Dollar Tree. I learned a little trick. When I made my first couple of polka dots, I saw that not all the paint was getting everywhere inside of the dot. So the second time I tried pressing just a little bit harder, but I still didn't get all the coverage that I wanted. So on the third polka dot, I twisted the little dauber a little bit, and that did the trick. So I went back and fixed the first couple and continued making my big white polka dots, twisting the dauber, and that worked like magic. Next, I strung up some more wooden beads. This time I left them their natural color, and these are going to work as a hanger. And then I tied my new beaded hanger to the holes that were already in the maple leaf. So this only cost me a couple of dollars, and I think that it looks like something so cute you'd find in a store. We are halfway there with Fall DIY number 5. This fall placemat is part of the new fall collection at the Dollar General store. It only was $2 and I loved the colors in it, and I am a sucker for plaid, so I knew right away I had to use it in a project. My idea was to put it together with this Dollar Tree picture frame, and I'm going to cut out a piece of this placemat to fit right inside. But first, I wanted to paint this picture frame with my Rust-Oleum chalk paint in linen white because I just like painting things white. And it was just a very rough, quick coat because I love that wood grain showing through, so I didn't want to cover that up too much. Next, I had to cut apart the placemat because I'm going to use both sides, and the plaid side is going to be the background, and the maroon side I'm going to cut the shape of a pumpkin. Plus, this is making the best use of this material because you have 2 separate pieces now to work with instead of just one. On the plaid piece, I used the glass from the frame to trace and cut around so I have a piece to go inside. Next, I'm going to use the piece off of this ball canning jar to draw 3 circles the same size, and these circles will become our pumpkin. Arrange the circles on top of the plaid piece so that they're overlapping and look like a pumpkin. And then once you have them looking the shape that you want, hot glue them in place. Next, I wanted there to be a stem for the pumpkin, and so I'm going to use my jute string and I'm going to hot glue it down in the shape of a stem. I thought that I was going to like the maroon color to work as a pumpkin because it's such a coordinating color because it was made with that placemat, but it was just too red. It was giving me apple vibes, so I decided to paint the pumpkin with some orange apple barrel paint. And the orange paint on top of that maroon red pumpkin turned it a rust color, which I really liked, and it still matched the plaid. Now the last part is to add the wording. I printed out Hello Fall, mirrored, meaning backwards, just on my regular printer, and here is some magic. Cricut infusible ink markers. I love using these because they're just so easy to use. All you have to do is draw or color, and on regular paper, you don't even have to have special paper, and then use your iron or your heat press to transfer it onto your fabric. They are wonderful. So now I just had to pick out what color I wanted my wording to be. I wanted a little more interest than just the plain black, so I went with the darkest gray type color. Then all you do is go over the words with the marker. I'm using my Cricut Easy Press to do the image transfer, but you could use a regular iron. Just set it to the highest heat setting. In either case, you want to have something underneath your fabric to protect your surface. I set my Easy Press to 385 degrees and the time for 15 seconds. While the Easy Press is heating up, cut out your wording and get it ready to transfer onto the plaid piece. You'll need some heat-resistant tape to hold the image in place while you are transferring it so it doesn't move around. There was one step that I forgot to do before I taped my image down. You're supposed to preheat your fabric. Run your iron or your easy press over your fabric for just a few seconds to pre-warm it up, and I forgot that step. I like to use parchment paper from the Dollar Tree to cover my images when I'm transferring. The easy press is ready. You can tell by the green cricket symbol. And so I picked it up and put it down, started the timer for 15 seconds. And when the 15 seconds was up, I did just a little peekaboo to try to see how we were doing. And I think because I forgot to do the preheat, it didn't transfer as well as I had hoped. But that's all on me. I've done this before and it transferred just fine the first time around. So I'm just going to give it another quick 15 seconds. And the second time around, yes, it was much, much better. And then the last step is just to put your nice design into the frame and you have a custom fall decoration. Are you ready for DIY number 4? Dollar Tree was really killing it with these plaques this summer. They have the wood beads, they have the jute string, they were all kinds of summer goodness, but I'm going to transform this one into fall. And I'm going to use this really pretty tissue paper that also came from the Dollar Tree. So here's a news bulletin for those who haven't heard. One of the trending colors for fall this year is navy blue, which makes me really happy because it's one of my favorite colors. And so that's why this plaid tissue paper from the Dollar Tree is so perfect for this project. My plan is to line the inside of this box with the tissue paper. And I'm going to use the suggestion of many of my subscribers who've told me, measure the inside of the box and then cut your piece out. And that's such a duh. Why didn't I think of that before? But I'm going to use that method this time. So my box measured just about 5.5 inches both ways. Next, you'll need to prepare the decoration for painting, which means you're going to have to cut off the cute handle, but I cut it as close to that knot as I possibly could so that I could reuse that jute string and of course the 2 beads. And then it took 2 good coats of Rust-Oleum chalk paint in linen white to cover all the wording and the green on the decoration. And while I was at it, I just went ahead and put a nice clean coat of white paint all over the entire thing. Next, you will stick down the plaid tissue paper to the inside of the box, and I used just regular school glue that came from the Dollar Tree. No need to even get out your Mod Podge. Just be careful that when you're putting down this tissue paper, because it is delicate, that it is lined up correctly before you press it down into the glue. And then smooth out any air bubbles with your fingers. So now we have a blank canvas and we can put anything inside here that we want. I chose to put a leaf inside. Just go to Google Images and type in maple leaf clip art and you'll get a whole bunch of images to choose from. I printed mine out on cardstock paper first because I want something sturdy that I can trace around. And then I cut this leaf out. This is the paper that I really want the leaf to be made out of, and it is some scrapbook paper that came from Michael's. So that's why I did the cardstock first. Now I'm going to trace it onto the back side so there's no chance of being able to see my ink marks with my tracing when I get this cut out. This is some mounting foam tape that I found at the Dollar Tree, and it's by the Super Glue brand, and that's what I use to put on the back of the leaf to stick it down inside the box so it has a 3D popped effect. And this is some small scrapbook paper that I've had on hand for a long time. And these are some really neat vintage looking brads that I got from Michael's, and they have letters stamped on them. And so I'm going to layer all of these elements up onto this leaf. Here we go, the top 3. All the materials you'll find at the Dollar Tree, and I'm starting with this geode, I think it's called a geode, art piece, but it's just made of cardboard really, and it just doesn't fit in my house. So I'm going to take the geode part off of the stand, and I'm just going to use the stand. And the way that I did that was by prying it off with a flathead screwdriver. And then I pulled the remaining jaggedy pieces of cardboard off of the stand so that they won't show even from the back side. I want this to be a nice piece. And the legs on the stand are stapled on, and so the staples are poking out the back. So I'm just hammering those down with the end of my screwdriver so that they don't hurt me. So obviously now we have a nicer smooth side, and then the back side, which is what we pried apart. And so we are going to use this large leaf cutout from the Dollar Tree. And of course we're going to decorate it first, but it's going to be glued onto the stand. Now, the first thing I needed to do with this leaf was to cut off its hanger and fill in the hole that's left. I finally remembered to buy more spackle from the Dollar Tree. This is really easy to work with. It's lightweight spackle and it dries really quick. So I just dabbed some of that on with my tool that also came from the Dollar Tree, and I put enough of it to fill the hole and I let it dry. Actually, I speed dried it with my hair dryer. Then I painted the big leaf with 2 coats of Rust-Oleum chalked in linen white front and back, and making sure that the edges are covered too. I dried my leaf with my hair dryer, and once it was completely dry, then I used my 80 grit sandpaper. I'm not really sure about the grits of sandpaper, what's good to use on what, but this is just what I had, and it came from Dollar Tree. And I sanded down those layers of paint so that this leaf looked so nice and smooth. And I also sanded the edges so that that would take away any cakey pieces of paint that pulled around the edges. And because I am going for a neutral fall look, I'm decorating this leaf with some gray chalk paint. And this is chalk paint that's from Michael's. It's in the color Artifact. I've had this jar forever and a day, and it's perfect for purposes just like this. So I'm using one of the little stippling stencil little chippy brushes from the Dollar Tree to apply it around the edges using a dry brush technique. So when I dip my brush into the paint, I also dab a lot of it off into the lid before I start putting it onto the leaf. And I tried to make sure I was going in the direction that the pieces of the leaf would be going, like where the veins would be going. Next, there could be all kinds of ways of doing what I'm about to do, which is transferring an image onto this leaf. Now, I'm going to use the wax paper method, or you can use freezer paper. I hear freezer paper goes through the printer better, but I didn't have any of that. So we're going to print on this wax paper. I have a piece of cardstock paper, and I'm going to put the wax paper on top. You want the waxy side out. And I'm going to tape it down onto the cardstock paper. The important thing about when you are about to print this out, it needs to be mirrored. Make sure that the print is mirrored. You want it to be backwards because anytime that you are ironing something onto something or sublimating or transferring an image, just like we are getting ready to do, you want the wording to be backwards so when you flip it over, it will read correctly. The easiest way to get your wax paper off of the cardstock without risking tearing into your image is to cut all the way around it. You have to be very careful when you're handling your wax paper with the writing on it because the ink will still be wet because it was printed on wax paper, and that's how we get the transfer. So just make sure that when you're positioning it onto the leaf, that before you let it touch the leaf, it is exactly where you want it to be. Then you will use some sort of a tool. You could use a credit card, Kroger card. I'm using a spackling scraper thing to press it onto the wood. It's kind of like a rub-on transfer. Ta-da! This is the first time that I actually used this method, and I will be using it some more because it sure worked. Now you want to attach the leaf to the stand so that it will stand up, and my first inclination was just to grab my glue gun, so I ran my glue and I put my leaf in place, but guess what? It didn't stick. That glue just wanted to peel right back off. So then I decided to try my Star Bond glue. The instructions say that it doesn't take very much, so I'm just going to use 3 little dots of the glue. And this is why I chose to use the thick glue, because a thinner glue just kind of seeps into that cardboard. Then you use the accelerator spray on the other piece. So I put the glue on the stand. I'm going to spray the accelerator onto the leaf, and they're going to bond together. And it only takes 10 to 20 seconds. And so this is my first fall DIY of the season. I think we started with a bang. You'll want to try Fall DIY number 2. DIY, I'm using this wooden slat that came from the Dollar Tree. And this was the first time that I've ever seen these slats. I picked up 4 of them. And I'm pairing with it this nice gather sign that was also from the Dollar Tree. And the first thing I did was remove the hanger from the gather sign. Now these chunky wooden slats are kind of rough, so I sanded mine. And my idea is to make the gather stand up on the slat. So I'm going to use some super glue wood glue to adhere both pieces together. It takes a little time and patience when you're using wood glue. I did let this set overnight before I continued with the rest of the project. Now you can see it's nice and sturdy and ready for painting. So I'm going to paint the base of this first with some Rust-Oleum Linen White chalk paint. Then I went back and painted the gather with some Elephant Gray Apple Barrel paint. Now I'm going to put a design on the gather, and at first I'm going to use this metallic white marker from the Dollar Tree, but I soon found out that it ran out of steam and I had to go back and just use a very thin paintbrush and some white paint. What I'm trying to accomplish here are some teeny tiny little pumpkins all over this, and I got this idea from the wonderful Jessica Lynn at Home here on YouTube, and I'll put a link in my description box for her channel and the video where she did this to one of her DIY projects. When the teeny tiny little white pumpkins were dry, then I painted on some stems with some dark brown paint. So this is a really cute tabletop decoration that only costs $2. And here it is, my very favorite fall DIY, number 1. The first one I'm going to share with you today is the one I am most excited about, and it starts with this little bank that came from the Dollar Tree. First, you'll remove the backing, and then you will remove the wording that is actually painted on the inside. First, I tried nail polish remover, but that didn't budge it, so it must not really be paint, it must be vinyl or something. So then I used my Dollar Tree scraper, and it was pretty easily scraped off. Next, I taped off the glass on the outside because I'm going to paint the frame. And I used 2 coats of Rust-Oleum Linen White chalk paint. When it's dry, remove the tape, and then it's ready to put all the pretty decorations inside. But before I start putting together the shadow box, I painted the background with a gray chalk paint. The first thing I'm decorating the shadow box with is a little wooden house that came from the Target dollar spot, and a set of 3 for $3 is a great deal. And here is how the house is going to sit inside. But now we need something to be like grass, like for the yard. There's a whole variety of things that could be used for grass. If I would have had reindeer moss, that probably would have been the best thing, but I didn't have any, so I'm just using some pieces of lamb's ear, and I'm going to hot glue it down like grass. Oh, and it's also really important that the slot that you would have used if you were using it for a bank, that's going to go on the bottom of your shadow box. So that is the ground. That is where the house is going to sit, and that's where you're putting your grass. But you want to make sure that you leave enough opening in that slot that you can string some fairy lights through later. Once you get your grass all situated, then put hot glue on the bottom of the house and set it inside. And I put a whole gob of extra hot glue on the back of the house to make sure that it didn't rattle around inside of the box. The next thing I decorated with was a sprig of boxwood, and this is going to work like a tree. Isn't that neat? But this looks more like a springtime thing, and it's fall. I'm decorating for fall. So I'm going to take this sprig of boxwood and I'm going to paint it with some fall colors. So I just put some orange and some browns and some yellow onto my plate, and I used a stencil kind of stipply brush to paint my leaves on the tree. Then I used a darker color brown to paint what will be the trunk. And now it's really looking a lot more like fall. To make the tree stand up inside the box, I trimmed off part of the bottom, and then I split the wires because there are wires inside of this boxwood sprig, and I pulled them apart like they would be the roots of the tree. Pause for a kitty cat break. They were really interested in this little tree that I made. Now the tree is the perfect size and it will stand up inside of our shadow box. I put a few dots of hot glue under the roots that I made to hold it in place. Then you get to light up your shadow box, and so you'll need some fairy lights. The ones from the Dollar Tree will do great. This set I had came from the Family Dollar store and it was a little too long for what I needed, so I really would recommend the ones from the Dollar Tree. But you'll string your lights up through the slot in the bottom and then wrap it around your tree. And the last part is to put the back in place. This one makes me smile every time I walk past it. So let's get this fall crafting season started, guys. And I hope you enjoyed this video. You got lots of ideas and inspiration. If you want to see even more DIYs, click the link I've provided for you right here, and I will see you next time. Bye.